Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of man who liked things neat and orderly. His house at 412 Maple Street stood out in the Willowbrook neighborhood, not because it was the biggest or the fanciest, but because everything about it was perfectly maintained. The lawn was trimmed to exactly 2 inches. The white picket fence gleamed with fresh paint every spring, and not a single leaf dared to stay on his driveway for more than a few hours. So when the solar panel installation company finished their work on his roof 3 months ago, Marcus stood in his front yard with his hands on his hips, admiring the sleek black rectangles that now covered the south-facing slope of his house. The panels weren't just about saving money on electricity bills, though. That was certainly a nice bonus. For Marcus, they represented progress, responsibility, and his commitment to doing the right thing for the environment. His neighbor across the street, however, saw things very differently. Elena Rodriguez had lived at 415 Maple Street for 15 years, 5 years longer than Marcus. She was an artist who worked from her home studio, creating vibrant murals and paintings that had decorated several buildings downtown. Elena believed that art should be everywhere, that color and creativity made life worth living. Her own house reflected this philosophy, with its cheerful yellow walls, purple shutters, and the garden full of wildflowers that she refused to trim into neat rows. The two neighbors had never been particularly close, but they'd always been polite. Marcus would wave when he saw Elena loading art supplies into her old van, and Elena would smile and nod when Marcus was out washing his car every Saturday morning. They represented 2 different approaches to life, but in a neighborhood where people mostly kept to themselves, different approaches could coexist peacefully. That peaceful coexistence began to crack on a Tuesday morning in late September. Marcus was getting ready for work, sipping his coffee and checking his phone for the daily energy report from his solar panel system, when he noticed something odd. The numbers were lower than usual. Not dramatically lower, but enough to make him frown and double-check the app. Solar panels were supposed to be incredibly reliable, and the weather had been perfectly sunny for the past week. He stepped outside to take a look at his roof, shading his eyes against the morning sun. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The panels were all in place, no obvious damage or debris. But as he walked around to get a better angle, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There, on the corner panel closest to the street, was a small streak of bright blue paint. Marcus blinked hard, certain he must be seeing things. But no, there it was. A deliberate brushstroke of electric blue paint right across one corner of his expensive solar panel. He walked closer to the house, craning his neck to get a better view, and felt his stomach drop. It wasn't just one panel. As his eyes adjusted and he looked more carefully, he could see tiny touches of color on several panels. Blue here, yellow there, a hint of red on another. Someone had painted his solar panels. His first thought was vandalism, teenagers maybe, or some kind of random act of destruction. But as he stood there staring up at his roof, trying to process what he was seeing, he noticed something else. The paint strokes weren't random or destructive. They were small, careful, artistic. They looked almost like they belonged there, like someone had turned his practical solar installation into some kind of canvas. Marcus felt his face getting hot. These panels had cost him nearly $20,000. They were supposed to last for 25 years, providing clean energy and reducing his carbon footprint. Now someone had treated them like a playground for their artistic expression, and he had no idea how the paint might affect their efficiency, or whether it could be removed without damage. He pulled out his phone and called his office to let them know he'd be late, then spent the next hour walking around his house, trying to get a complete view of the damage. The more he looked, the more paint he found. It wasn't covering large areas, just small accents and details, but it was definitely intentional. Someone had climbed up on his roof, probably in the middle of the night, and turned his solar panel array into their personal art project. As he stood there fuming, Elena emerged from her house across the street, carrying a canvas and her easel toward her van. She was wearing paint-splattered overalls and had her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. When she saw Marcus in his front yard, she waved cheerfully and called out, "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Marcus looked at her, then looked back up at his roof, then looked at her again. She was an artist. She had paint supplies. She lived right across the street, and now that he thought about it, hadn't he heard some kind of noise in the middle of the night a few days ago? Something that might have been someone climbing around on a roof? "Elena," he called out, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Did you paint my solar panels? Elena stopped loading her van and turned to face him fully. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. Then slowly a smile spread across her face. Not a guilty smile or an apologetic smile, but a proud, satisfied smile. Do you like it? She asked, as if she'd just asked him about the weather. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Do I like it? You painted my solar panels without permission. You damaged my property. Elena's smile faded slightly, but she didn't look sorry. I enhanced them, she said firmly. Those black rectangles were so boring, so industrial. Now they're beautiful. Now they're art. They're solar panels, Marcus exploded. They're supposed to generate electricity, not be art. And you had no right to touch them. Other neighbors were starting to notice the commotion. Mrs. Peterson from next door peeked out her window, and Tom Wilson from 2 houses down slowed his morning jog to listen. Elena seemed to realize that their conversation was becoming public, but instead of backing down, she squared her shoulders and walked across the street to stand in Marcus's front yard. Look, she said, pointing up at his roof. Really look. Tell me they don't look better now. Marcus stared up at his roof, his jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth hurt. From where he stood, he had to admit that Elena's additions weren't completely random. The small touches of blue seemed to follow the lines where the panels met, creating a subtle border effect. The yellow dots were placed at regular intervals, almost like decorative rivets. The red streaks curved along the edges in a way that somehow made the rigid rectangular panels look more organic, more integrated with the roofline. But beautiful or not, they were still painted on his property without his permission, and that was all that mattered to him. They look vandalized, he said through gritted teeth, and even if they looked like the Sistine Chapel, you had no right to do this without asking me first. Elena crossed her arms. Would you have said yes if I'd asked? Of course not. Exactly. That's why I didn't ask. She gestured toward the roof with obvious pride. Art doesn't always wait for permission, Marcus. Sometimes beauty has to be created where beauty is needed most. By now, several neighbors had gathered. Mrs. Peterson had come out onto her porch, still wearing her bathrobe and slippers. Tom Wilson had given up any pretense of jogging and was standing openly on the sidewalk listening to every word. The Nguyen family from the corner house had paused their morning dog walk, and even old Mr. Franklin, who rarely emerged from his house before noon, was peering through his blinds. Marcus realized that his private property dispute was rapidly becoming neighborhood entertainment, which only made him angrier. He pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of his roof, documenting every painted mark he could see. What are you doing? Elena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. I'm calling the police, Marcus said, and probably my insurance company, and maybe a lawyer. Elena's confident expression faltered for the first time. Marcus, don't you think that's a little extreme? It's just paint. It's not like I broke anything. You damaged my solar panels. Do you have any idea how much those cost? Do you know that paint might reduce their efficiency? I could lose thousands of dollars in energy production because of your little art project. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat from her porch. Maybe you two should discuss this calmly, she suggested in the diplomatic tone of someone who'd seen plenty of neighbor disputes over the years. There's nothing to discuss, Marcus snapped. She committed vandalism. She needs to pay to have the panels cleaned or replaced, and she needs to face consequences for what she did. Elena's face was getting red now, her artistic pride warring with the growing realization that she might be in serious trouble. The paint I used is water-based and eco-friendly, she said defensively. It's the same kind I use for outdoor murals. It won't hurt the panels. You don't know that. You're not a solar panel expert. You're just someone who thinks the whole world is your canvas. The argument might have escalated further, but at that moment, a white sedan pulled up to the curb and a woman in a dark blue uniform stepped out. Officer Janet Morrison had been patrolling the Willowbrook neighborhood for 6 years, and she'd learned to recognize the signs of a dispute that was about to get out of hand. Good morning, folks, she said in the calm professional tone that came from years of diffusing tense situations. I got a call about a disturbance. What seems to be the problem here? Marcus immediately launched into his story, pointing repeatedly at his roof and speaking rapidly about property damage and trespassing. Elena tried to interrupt several times to explain her artistic vision, but Officer Morrison held up a hand for silence. Let me get this straight, the officer said after Marcus finished his breathless account. Ms. Rodriguez, you climbed onto Mr. Thompson's roof and painted designs on his solar panels without his permission? Elena nodded reluctantly. But I made them beautiful. I improved them. That's not the issue, Officer Morrison said gently. The issue is that you altered someone else's property without consent. Regardless of your artistic intentions, that's considered vandalism under city ordinance. The gathered neighbors murmured among themselves. Elena looked genuinely shocked, as if the legal implications of her midnight art project had never occurred to her. I didn't think of it as vandalism, she said quietly. I thought of it as community beautification. The whole neighborhood has to look at those panels every day. Shouldn't they be something pleasant to look at? That's not your decision to make, Marcus said firmly. And now I have to figure out how to get this paint off without damaging the panels. These things have a special coating that's crucial for their efficiency. If your paint screwed that up, you're going to pay for brand new panels. Officer Morrison took notes as she surveyed the roof through binoculars. I can see the painted areas from here, she confirmed. Mr. Thompson, do you want to press charges? Elena looked stricken. Charges? Like criminal charges? Vandalism is a misdemeanor, the officer explained. It can result in fines, community service, and restitution for damages. Marcus felt a moment of satisfaction, but as he looked at Elena's pale face, he also felt an unexpected twinge of something that might have been guilt. She wasn't a malicious vandal. She was just someone who saw the world differently than he did. Someone who couldn't stand the sight of boring black rectangles when they could be something more interesting. But then he thought about the potential thousands of dollars in damage, the disruption to his carefully planned energy savings, and the violation of his property rights. His moment of sympathy evaporated. Yes, he said firmly, I want to press charges. The crowd of neighbors exchanged glances. Some nodded approvingly, while others looked uncomfortable with the escalation. Elena's face crumpled slightly, but she straightened her shoulders and faced Officer Morrison. I understand, she said with dignity. I didn't think about the legal aspects, but I take responsibility for what I did. Officer Morrison began the process of taking Elena's statement and writing up the incident report. As she worked, more neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the sight of the police car and the unusual drama unfolding on their quiet street. Among them was David Chen, who lived 3 houses down from Marcus and worked as an electrical engineer. He'd been following the conversation from his driveway while loading his car for work, and now he approached the group with a thoughtful expression. Marcus, he said quietly, before this goes any further, you might want to have someone actually assess whether the paint caused any real damage. I know a guy who specializes in solar panel maintenance. Maybe we should find out what we're actually dealing with before involving lawyers and insurance companies. Marcus turned to look at David, then back at Elena, who was answering Officer Morrison's questions in a subdued voice. Around them, the neighborhood watched and waited, sensing that this morning's events would be talked about for months to come. By Thursday morning, word of the solar panel incident had spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. The neighborhood WhatsApp group was buzzing with opinions. The local Facebook page had 3 different discussion threads about it, and Marcus couldn't walk to his mailbox without someone stopping him to ask about the situation. David Chen's solar panel expert, a cheerful man named Roberto Santos, had come out Wednesday afternoon to assess the damage. Marcus had watched nervously as Roberto climbed up on his roof with various testing equipment, checking the painted panels against the unpainted ones. The results were both better and worse than Marcus had feared. The good news, Roberto had explained, standing in Marcus's driveway with his clipboard, is that the paint isn't affecting the electrical output significantly. Maybe a 2% reduction in efficiency on the painted panels, which translates to about $15 less in energy savings per year. Marcus had felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by irritation as Roberto continued. The bad news is that removing the paint is going to be tricky. Solar panels have an anti-reflective coating that's crucial for their performance. If we're not careful during the cleaning process, we could damage that coating and create much bigger efficiency problems. So what are my options? Marcus had asked. Roberto had shrugged. Leave the paint alone, pay for professional removal that might cause more damage than the paint itself, or replace the affected panels entirely. Now, as Marcus sat at his kitchen table Thursday morning, staring at Roberto's written estimate for panel replacement, he felt his anger returning. $2,300 to replace the painted panels. Even if Elena paid for it, which she'd agreed to do, the whole situation was a massive headache that could have been avoided if she'd just minded her own business. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Saw the news story online. Mom wants to know if you're okay. Marcus frowned and opened his web browser. It took him only a few seconds to find what his sister was referring to. And when he did, his heart sank. The headline read, "Local artist faces charges for beautifying neighbor's solar panels." Below it was a photo of his house, clearly showing the painted panels along with a smaller photo of Elena looking sad and artistic in front of her colorful home. The article, published by the Regional Arts Weekly, painted Elena as a misunderstood creative spirit and Marcus as an uptight homeowner more concerned with property values than community beauty. It quoted Elena extensively about her artistic vision and mentioned Marcus only as the homeowner who pressed charges. "This is ridiculous," Marcus muttered, scrolling through the comments below the article. Most of them were supportive of Elena, criticizing Marcus for being soulless and anti-art. A few defended his property rights, but they were outnumbered by people calling him everything from a stick in the mud to exactly what's wrong with suburbia. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number. "Marcus, honey, are you all right? I saw the most awful article online about some woman vandalizing your house." "I'm fine, Mom, it's complicated." "Well, I don't think it's complicated at all. That woman had no right to touch your property. When I was your age, people respected boundaries. Are you sure the police are taking this seriously?" Marcus appreciated his mother's support, but as he listened to her ranting about entitled artists and declining social standards, he found himself thinking about Elena's face when Officer Morrison had explained the potential consequences of her actions. She hadn't looked entitled. She'd looked genuinely surprised and increasingly horrified as she realized the legal trouble she was in. After ending the call with his mother, Marcus decided he needed coffee and some air. He drove to Java Junction, the neighborhood coffee shop where he usually went on weekend mornings. He'd hoped to avoid the crowds and the stares, but apparently half the neighborhood had the same idea. The moment he walked in, conversation stopped. People turned to look at him, some with sympathy, others with what looked like disapproval. Marcus ordered his usual large coffee and found a table in the corner, hoping to drink it in peace. That hope was dashed when Tom Wilson, the neighborhood jogger who'd witnessed the confrontation Tuesday morning, approached his table with his own coffee. "Mind if I sit?" Tom asked. "I wanted to talk to you about this whole thing." Marcus gestured to the empty chair, resigned to another conversation about his painted panels. "Look," Tom said, settling into his seat. "I get why you're angry. Elena definitely overstepped, but I've been thinking about this situation, and I wonder if there's a better way to handle it. Such as, well, have you talked to Elena since Tuesday? Like really talked to her, not just yelled at each other in the street?" Marcus shook his head. He'd seen Elena around the neighborhood, but they'd both gone out of their way to avoid each other. "Maybe you should," Tom continued. "I mean, she's facing criminal charges over what amounts to a $15 a year reduction in your electric bill efficiency. Don't you think that's a little harsh?" "It's not about the money," Marcus said firmly. "It's about respect for other people's property. If I let this slide, what's next? Someone decides my fence would look better purple? Someone plants flowers in my front yard because they don't like my grass?" Tom nodded thoughtfully. "I understand the principle, but Elena's been part of this community for 15 years. She's painted murals for the school fundraiser. She donates art supplies to the kids' programs at the community center, and she's never caused any trouble before. Maybe this was just a case of good intentions and bad judgment. Good intentions don't pay for damaged property." "But what if the property isn't really damaged? You said yourself that Roberto guy found minimal impact on efficiency." Marcus was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee and watching other customers pretend not to be listening to their conversation. He thought about the phone calls he'd been getting from local reporters wanting to interview him, about the way his neighbors were looking at him, about the online comments calling him heartless. "Tom," he said finally, "what would you do if someone painted your house without asking?" "Honestly, I'd probably be furious at first, just like you were. But after I calmed down, I'd try to figure out if it was worth destroying someone's life over. I'm not destroying her life. I'm holding her accountable for her actions. Criminal charges, Marcus. She could end up with a record that affects her ability to get teaching jobs, gallery shows, grants for her art. Is that really proportional to the actual harm she caused? Before Marcus could answer, the coffee shop door opened and Elena walked in. She looked tired and stressed, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by something more subdued. When she saw Marcus sitting with Tom, she hesitated, clearly considering whether to leave. Tom waved her over. "Elena, come join us. I think you two need to have a real conversation." Elena approached their table slowly, like someone walking toward a potentially dangerous animal. "I don't want to intrude," she said quietly. "You're not intruding," Tom said, pulling out a chair for her. "Sit, talk, work this out like adults." Marcus felt trapped. Half the coffee shop was watching them, and walking away would make him look petty and childish. Elena sat down hesitantly, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of tea. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Elena looked directly at Marcus for the first time since Tuesday morning. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I was wrong to paint your panels without asking. I got so caught up in my vision of how beautiful they could be that I forgot they weren't mine to change." Marcus stared at Elena across the small coffee shop table, processing her apology. He'd expected defensiveness, maybe another lecture about art and beauty. Instead, she looked genuinely remorseful, and that threw him off balance. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why my panels? Why didn't you ask first?" Elena sighed and wrapped her hands more tightly around her tea mug. "Honestly, I'd been looking at them for months, ever since you had them installed. Every morning when I stepped outside to get my newspaper, there they were, these big black rectangles dominating your roofline, and they just looked so sterile, so industrial. They're supposed to look industrial. They're solar panels, not art installations. I know that now. But at the time I kept thinking about how they affected the whole street's aesthetic. I mean, we all have to look at them, right? And I thought if I could just add some small touches, some color that complemented your house's existing colors, they could be functional and beautiful at the same time." Tom leaned forward. "So why not ask Marcus first?" Elena glanced around the coffee shop, aware that their conversation was drawing attention. She lowered her voice. "Because I knew he'd say no. I thought if I did it carefully, subtly, he might actually like it once he saw it. I've done guerrilla art projects before, little improvements around the neighborhood that people initially resist but then grow to appreciate." "Like what?" Marcus asked, despite himself. "Remember the utility box on Elm Street that was covered in graffiti? I painted a mural over it 3 years ago without getting permission first. The city was going to cite me, but so many people loved it that they ended up commissioning me to paint 5 more utility boxes around town." Marcus did remember that mural. It was a beautiful landscape scene that had transformed an eyesore into something that actually enhanced the neighborhood. But that didn't make Elena's actions with his solar panels acceptable. "That's different," he said. "Utility boxes are public property. My solar panels are private property, and expensive private property." "You're absolutely right," Elena agreed. "I understand that now. I let my artistic impulses override my common sense and my respect for your property rights." Tom sipped his coffee, watching the interaction between his neighbors. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with quiet conversations and the sound of the espresso machine, but Marcus could feel people stealing glances at their table. "The thing is," Marcus said slowly, "it's not just about the panels themselves. It's about the precedent. If people think they can just modify other people's property because they think it looks better, where does it end?" Elena nodded. "I get that. I really do. And I want to make this right. I've already talked to a lawyer about the criminal charges, and I'm prepared to pay for whatever needs to be done to fix the panels. Roberto says replacement might be the best option. That's $2,300. Elena's face went pale, but she nodded. "I'll pay it. It might take me a few months to come up with that much money, but I'll pay it." Marcus felt another unexpected twinge of guilt. $2,300 was probably a significant financial burden for Elena, whose income as a freelance artist was likely much less predictable than his steady corporate salary. "There's something else," Elena continued. I've been getting calls from reporters and art bloggers who want to turn this into some kind of statement about artistic freedom versus property rights. I want you to know that I'm not encouraging that. This isn't about making a political statement. This is about me making a mistake and needing to fix it." Tom raised an eyebrow. "But some people are turning it into a statement, whether you want them to or not. I saw that article in the Arts Weekly. They made Marcus sound like some kind of art-hating villain." Marcus grimaced. "Yeah, I saw that too, along with about 50 nasty comments from people who don't even live in this neighborhood telling me what an awful person I am." "I'm sorry about that," Elena said sincerely. "I never intended for this to become public drama. I thought we'd work it out between ourselves." "Well, it became public drama the moment the police got involved," Marcus pointed out. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Tom cleared his throat. "Can I make a suggestion? What if you two figured out a way to resolve this that doesn't involve criminal charges? Elena pays for the damage, maybe does some community service, and this whole thing gets handled privately instead of turning into a neighborhood circus." Marcus considered this. The criminal charges were proceeding slowly through the system, and his court date wasn't for another month. He could drop the charges if he wanted to, but part of him felt like Elena needed to face real consequences for her actions. "I don't know," he said. "What kind of community service?" Elena looked hopeful. "I could teach art classes at the community center, or paint murals for local nonprofits. Whatever the neighborhood thinks would be most beneficial." "That's not really punishment, though, is it? That's just you doing more of what you love to do." Elena's expression grew more serious. "Marcus, do you want me to be punished or do you want the situation to be made right? Because if it's punishment you're after, then yeah, criminal charges and a possible criminal record will definitely punish me. But if you want the situation fixed and some guarantee that it won't happen again, maybe we can find a better way." Marcus found himself thinking about his mother's phone call, about the online comments calling him heartless, about the way some of his neighbors had been looking at him over the past few days. He'd been so focused on being right that he hadn't really considered whether being right was the same thing as doing the right thing. "What kind of guarantee?" he asked. "Well, for starters, I could agree in writing never to alter anyone else's property without explicit permission, and maybe I could work with the neighborhood association to create guidelines for public art projects, so there's a proper process for people who want to beautify the community." Tom nodded enthusiastically. "That's actually a great idea. We've talked about wanting more public art in the neighborhood, but we've never had a clear process for making it happen." Marcus looked back and forth between Tom and Elena, feeling like he was being tag-teamed. But their suggestions weren't unreasonable, and the truth was that he was getting tired of being the villain in this story. "Let me think about it," he said finally. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Here's my contact information. When you're ready to talk more, just call me. And Marcus, thank you for being willing to consider alternatives. I know I don't deserve your flexibility on this." After Elena left, Tom stayed at the table with Marcus for a few more minutes. "You know," Tom said, "this whole situation has gotten me thinking about our neighborhood. We all live so close together, but most of us barely know each other. Maybe something good could come out of this mess." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Well, Elena's idea about working with the neighborhood association on public art guidelines is actually pretty smart. And maybe this whole conflict has shown us that we need better ways to communicate with each other about changes that affect the community." Marcus finished his coffee and stood up to leave. "Maybe. But first I need to figure out what to do about those painted panels and whether to drop the criminal charges." As he walked to his car, Marcus realized that for the first time since Tuesday morning, he wasn't entirely sure what the right answer was anymore. The weekend brought an unexpected complication to Marcus's already complex situation. He was washing his car in the driveway Saturday morning when a white van pulled up with Channel 7 News emblazoned on the side. A woman in a bright red blazer emerged, followed by a man carrying a large camera. "Mr. Thompson?" the woman called out, approaching with the confident stride of someone accustomed to inserting herself into other people's business. "I'm Sarah Mitchell from Channel 7. I was hoping to get your side of the story about the solar panel incident." Marcus dropped his sponge back into the bucket of soapy water. I'm not interested in talking to reporters. I understand your reluctance, but this story has really captured people's attention. The video of your painted panels has been shared thousands of times on social media. People are calling it everything from guerrilla beautification to artistic terrorism. Don't you want to share your perspective? My perspective is that someone vandalized my property, and I'm dealing with it through appropriate legal channels. That's all I have to say. Sarah Mitchell smiled in the way that news reporters do when they sense a story getting more interesting. But according to our sources, you're considering dropping the criminal charges. Some people are saying you've been pressured by the local art community to let Ms. Rodriguez off the hook. Marcus felt his face getting hot. Your sources are wrong, and I haven't been pressured by anyone. So you are planning to proceed with the criminal charges? Marcus realized he was being maneuvered into making a public statement about a decision he hadn't actually made yet. I'm not discussing this with you. Please leave my property. The cameraman had been filming throughout the exchange, and Marcus could see other neighbors coming out of their houses to watch the drama unfold. Mrs. Peterson stood on her porch with her arms crossed, shaking her head disapprovingly at the news crew. The Nguyen family had paused their weekend yard work to stare, and even old Mr. Franklin was visible at his window. After the news van finally drove away, Marcus went inside and called Elena's number. We need to talk, he said when she answered. The media situation is getting out of hand. Elena agreed to meet him at Riverside Park, a neutral location away from the curious eyes of their neighbors. When Marcus arrived, he found Elena sitting on a bench near the duck pond, looking almost as stressed as he felt. Did you see the news crew? He asked without preamble. Elena nodded glumly. They came to my house first. I refused to talk to them, but apparently they're not taking no for an answer. My friend who runs the gallery downtown said she's been getting calls from reporters wanting to know about my artistic philosophy and whether this incident represents some kind of movement. Marcus sat down on the bench beside her, maintaining careful distance. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Now our private dispute is becoming some kind of public spectacle about art versus property rights. I know, and I'm sorry. I never wanted this to become a media circus. They sat in silence for a moment, watching ducks paddle around the pond while families with young children played on the nearby playground. It was a peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the chaos their situation had created. Elena, Marcus said finally, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. If I drop the criminal charges and we work out a private settlement, can you guarantee that this kind of thing will never happen again? Not just with my property, but with anyone's property? Elena turned to face him fully. Yes, absolutely. This whole experience has taught me that good intentions aren't enough. I should have found a way to talk to you first, to propose the idea and get your permission. I was so focused on the end result that I ignored the process, and that was wrong. But what if I had said no? What if I'd told you I wanted my panels to stay exactly as they were? Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Then I would have had to accept that. Your property, your choice. I might not have liked it, but I would have had to respect it. Marcus found himself believing her. The past few days had clearly been a wake-up call for Elena, forcing her to confront the consequences of her impulsive decision in ways she'd never anticipated. Okay, he said slowly. Here's what I'm thinking. You pay for the panel replacement, as agreed. You also do 20 hours of community service but not teaching art classes, something that's actually a sacrifice for you, not something you'd enjoy. Elena nodded. What kind of community service? I don't know yet. Maybe cleaning up graffiti around the neighborhood, or helping with the community center's landscaping. Something that benefits everyone but isn't your idea of fun. That sounds fair. And you work with the neighborhood association to create proper guidelines for future public art projects, with clear processes for getting permission and community input. I'd be happy to do that. Marcus took a deep breath, and in exchange I dropped the criminal charges. But Elena, if anything like this ever happens again with anyone's property, I'll make sure the charges stick. Elena extended her hand. Deal. They shook hands, and Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The anger that had been consuming him for the past week began to dissipate, replaced by something that felt almost like relief. There's one more thing, Elena said hesitantly. Would you be open to seeing what the panels look like once Roberto finishes the professional cleaning? He thinks he might be able to remove most of the paint without damaging the anti-reflective coating. Marcus frowned. I thought he said replacement was the safest option. It is, but he also said he'd be willing to try a careful cleaning process first at no charge, since it would give him experience with paint removal techniques. If it works, it saves us both money. If it doesn't, we go with replacement. And if the cleaning works, you're okay with the panels going back to their original appearance? Elena smiled, but it was a genuine smile rather than the mischievous grin she'd worn the morning of their confrontation. Marcus, those are your panels. Whatever you decide about their appearance is fine with me. As they walked back to their cars, Marcus found himself looking at Elena differently. She was still someone whose approach to life was fundamentally different from his own. But she wasn't the selfish, entitled artist he'd convinced himself she was. She was someone who'd made a mistake, recognized it, and was willing to make amends. Elena, he said as they reached the parking area, after we get this whole mess sorted out, maybe we could start over. As neighbors, I mean. Proper neighbors who actually talk to each other instead of just waving from across the street. Elena's face lit up. I'd like that. And Marcus, thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. I know you didn't have to. That evening, Marcus called Officer Morrison to formally request that the criminal charges be dropped in favor of a private settlement. Then he called Roberto to schedule the experimental cleaning process for Monday morning. As he stood in his backyard that night, looking up at his painted solar panels silhouetted against the darkening sky, Marcus realized that the past week had taught him something unexpected about the nature of community. Sometimes the most important things weren't about being right or protecting your property or maintaining control. Sometimes they were about finding ways to live peacefully with people who saw the world differently than you did. He still thought Elena had been wrong to paint his panels without permission, but he was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, there might be more than one way to make things right. 3 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in his front yard on a crisp December morning, holding a cup of coffee and watching Roberto Santos make final adjustments to the newest addition to his roof. The original solar panels were back to their sleek black appearance, thanks to Roberto's successful cleaning experiment that had removed Elena's paint without damaging the anti-reflective coating. But now, installed on the west-facing slope of his roof, was something entirely new. The community art panel project had been Elena's idea, proposed during the first official meeting of the Willowbrook Neighborhood Beautification Committee. Instead of individual residents making unauthorized changes to private property, the neighborhood would collectively fund and vote on public art installations that enhanced the community while respecting property rights. Marcus had been skeptical at first, but as Elena had presented her detailed proposal, complete with cost estimates, community input processes, and maintenance plans, he'd found himself impressed by her thoroughness. The woman who had impulsively painted his solar panels in the middle of the night had transformed into someone who thought carefully about logistics, permissions, and community consensus. The art panel project was the committee's first official undertaking. Using the same solar panel technology as Marcus's energy system, Elena had designed a series of decorative panels that would generate electricity while displaying a rotating collection of community artwork. The panels were installed on volunteers' houses throughout the neighborhood, with the generated electricity contributing to shared community spaces like the playground and the community center. Marcus had surprised everyone, including himself, by volunteering his house for one of the artistic panels. Elena had designed something specifically for his west-facing roof, a geometric pattern in blues and grays that complemented his house's color scheme while incorporating photovoltaic cells in a way that made them part of the artistic design rather than hiding them. That should do it, Roberto called down from the roof. Your new art panel is officially online and generating power. Marcus pulled out his phone and checked the monitoring app. Sure enough, the new panel was already producing electricity, feeding into the community energy fund that would help reduce costs for neighborhood events and improvements. Elena emerged from her house across the street, wearing her paint-splattered overalls and carrying a steaming mug of tea. Over the past few months, their morning routines had gradually synchronized, and these brief front-yard conversations had become a pleasant start to their days. "How's it look?" she asked, joining Marcus in his driveway and looking up at the newly installed panel. "It looks good. Marcus admitted. I never thought I'd say this, but you were right about function and beauty being able to coexist. Elena grinned. Just don't let it go to my head. I'm still learning to ask permission before I start changing things. Her community service hours had been completed by November, spent helping to clean up illegal graffiti around the commercial district and assisting with the community center's holiday decorating. Marcus had volunteered to supervise some of those hours, and he'd been surprised to discover that Elena was actually good company when she wasn't trespassing on his property. Speaking of changes, Elena said, "Did you see Mrs. Peterson's proposal for the community garden?" Marcus nodded. Mrs. Peterson had caught the community improvement bug from Elena's committee and was now advocating for a shared vegetable garden in the unused corner lot at the end of their street. The project would require navigating city permits and organizing neighborhood volunteers, but the early response had been enthusiastic. 3 months ago, this neighborhood barely had conversations between neighbors, Marcus observed. Now we have committees and projects and people actually talking to each other. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring people together, Elena said. Even a crisis as silly as someone painting solar panels without permission. Tom Wilson jogged past, as he did every morning, but instead of just waving, he stopped to admire the new art panel and chat about the upcoming neighborhood association meeting. The Nguyen family, walking their dog, paused to discuss the community garden proposal. Even old Mr. Franklin, who had become surprisingly social since the solar panel incident, shuffled over to examine Roberto's installation work. As the impromptu neighborhood gathering grew, Marcus realized that Elena's impulsive act of vandalism had accidentally created something valuable. Not the painted panels themselves, which had been a violation of his property rights regardless of their artistic merit, but the conversations and connections that had followed. You know, he said to Elena as Roberto packed up his equipment, I still think you were completely wrong to paint my panels without asking. Elena nodded seriously. You're absolutely right. I was wrong, but I'm glad it happened. Elena raised an eyebrow. Really? Marcus gestured around at their neighbors, chatting in small groups throughout the street, planning projects and sharing ideas. Look at this. 3 months ago, we were all strangers living in the same neighborhood. Now we're actually a community. Your mistake started something good. Well, when you put it that way, maybe I should go paint someone else's house, Elena said with a mischievous grin. Marcus laughed, but held up a warning finger. Don't even think about it. We have proper procedures now. Committees and proposals and community votes. Right, proper procedures. Elena's grin widened. Though I have been thinking about the blank wall on the side of the community center. It would make a perfect mural canvas, and with the new beautification committee guidelines. Elena. What? I'm following proper procedures now. I'll submit a formal proposal, get community input, obtain all necessary permissions. Marcus shook his head, but he was smiling. Just promise me you'll resist any urges to improve people's property without asking first. I promise. Scout's honor. Were you ever actually a scout? No, but the sentiment is genuine. As the morning gathering gradually dispersed and neighbors headed off to work or weekend errands, Marcus found himself looking forward to the next neighborhood association meeting. Elena's mural proposal would certainly generate interesting discussions, and Mrs. Peterson's community garden project needed volunteers for the spring planting. 6 months ago, Marcus Thompson had been a man who liked things neat, orderly, and predictable. He still appreciated those qualities, but he'd learned that sometimes the most valuable things in life came from the unexpected, the unplanned, and the slightly chaotic. His solar panels were back to their original appearance, generating clean energy exactly as designed, but his neighborhood had been transformed into something more colorful, more connected, and more alive than it had been before Elena Rodriguez had climbed onto his roof with a brush and some paint. As he headed inside to get ready for his day, Marcus caught sight of Elena across the street, already sketching ideas for her community center mural proposal. He made a mental note to volunteer for the beautification committee's review process. Someone needed to make sure she followed proper procedures, but he also made a note to vote yes on the mural proposal. The community center's blank wall really would look better with some color on it. Some changes, Marcus had learned, were worth making. As long as you asked permission first.